Hey, folks. Zach Osterman here.
Ready.
IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. He's Mike Niziolek. Scores Table Insider, Bloomington Herald Times. I don't know why that keeps happening. Forgive me. We will get that sorted out. But I don't know how many more of these post-game podcasts we're going to be able to do this season. Probably won't do one after Penn State because it's going to be so late. Ohio State will be tough because it's senior night, and then only you will be on the West Coast trip. So the point is, we wanted to do this one for you today. Also, a very big result. Indiana 73. Purdue 58. One of the starkest turnarounds I've ever seen in this building, certainly from Indiana, and especially given the opponent. They struggled in the first half. They kind of had some fire early, stopped hitting shots, really lost their way offensively, and Purdue goes in up 12. You didn't feel like the game was over. You just felt like Indiana kind of took a punch and couldn't swing back. But, they came back out, and at one point, I think in the second half, Indiana was outscoring Purdue 35-8. It was just like it was a second-half demolition that I've not seen Indiana put on a team of this quality, a team that's top 25, until recently was in the thick of the Big Ten title race, all-American point guard, all Big Ten forward. And certainly with all that we've talked about this Indiana team struggles this season, to see them capable of doing something like that was eye-opening.
Yeah, I think it highlighted kind of what we've talked about, that this team is capable of, has the talent to do this, right? Talent to kind of go up against anybody in the Big Ten, talent of beating anybody in the Big Ten. It's just a matter of, even today, they didn't put together a full 40-minute game. They still dug themselves a 12-point hole. Obviously, they're able to get out of it, but it's, in terms of not a full 40-minute game here, that last 10 minutes of the first half was really ugly. Mike Woodson talked about it. But obviously, you don't come away thinking much about that just because, they outscored them 48-21 in the second half and had Purdue. I think Painter called 3 timeouts trying to slow the momentum down, and no, not I think
it was 2, but either way,
I thought it was 3, but none of them worked. And
that has always been one of his great skills in this rivalry, in this building, has been managing the momentum that Assembly Hall can create, and knowing when to call a timeout, knowing how to kind of squeeze out just a quick 4-0 run just to kind of settle the crowd back down. And nothing worked for him.
And what's impressive is when you kind of look at it, you think about what Purdue did at the end of the first half, the way they were able to do it. They hit 6 or 7 from 3-point range, just outshot Indiana. Second half, Indiana, they hit 2 threes early. They were 3 of 8 in the second half. It really wasn't about that. It was more sort of about the defensive intensity they brought, and they forced 11 turnovers. 6 of those came, I think, in the first 8 minutes, led to runouts. Just sort of the defense I thought stood out, and then just sort of the cohesion kind of they had, throughout what they had 4 players play full 20 minutes in the second half.
Yeah.
Rice, Leal, Goody, and Galloway. Is that right? And so the cohesion of that group kind of stood out. It wasn't just that they hit a bunch of shots and called it a day. They were forcing turnovers, getting points off that way.
I thought they learned, probably learned a little bit from the game up in West Lafayette. But this has been the formula. Purdue's lost 4 in a row, and this has broadly been the formula. To kind of speed up Braden Smith. I think he had 6 turnovers tonight. He also had 6, or this afternoon he also had 6, if I'm not mistaken, in the Michigan State loss midweek. And then really punish Purdue's inability to guard the rim. Indiana was 19 of 21 on dunks and layups. They've scored 44 points. I think Michigan State had 40 or 42 in that game. Caleb First almost fouled out. Trey Kaufman-Renn did foul out. The only reason Malik Renew probably didn't have an even better day, and he was about as good as anybody in an Indiana uniform, was fouls. But between him and, he and Umar Ballo go for 27, 11 rebounds, and Renew also has 4 assists. And between them, they are 12 of 14 from the floor. Purdue just can't protect the rim at all right now defensively. And, obviously, Indiana this was one of those days where I thought, Woodson says this a lot, but I thought it was true today that Indiana was taking some good shots in the first half that weren't going down, some open threes that weren't going down. I think they missed 10 of their first 11 from behind the arc. But once they got kind of to where they needed to be offensively, they just, as you say, they just stopped worrying about threes and just punished Purdue where Purdue could not stop them. Purdue couldn't turn them over. Purdue had 1 more rebound, but that never felt like a crazy imbalance. This was Indiana seeing what has worked for Michigan, but particularly Wisconsin and Michigan State against this Purdue team and basically replicating the same thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's just you didn't get a chance to ask this, and I don't know if you would have answered honestly, just like a what if, like if this Indiana team had put it together like this 4 weeks ago.
Well,
what is this?
I think that's an interesting thread to pull on because of number one, the lineup change today. Mackenzie Mbako and Umar Bala are out of the starting lineup. I think that's the first time Mbako's played off the bench, maybe ever.
That's correct.
Yeah. Ballo has kind of been in and out a little bit, but for the most part has been an ever present in the starting five.
He had the start. He missed the one start in December for undisclosed reasons.
Not only did Indiana go away from that, but as you talked about, it's both the starting lineup and then also Mike Woodson just sort of saying, today we're just doing this. The only basically, I mean,
uncharacteristic, right? Because he had been sort of.
He's been looking for depth. I mean, he has.
No, but like he always hesitated to roll like that in the second half throughout his tenure, correct? Like,
he's always been a little bit less sort of auto sub in the second half than the first half.
Yeah.
It's always been a little bit more sort of whatever's working. That's what we're sticking with. But I mean, it's to only play 6 players and basically the only 2 that you interchange are your centers. In part because of foul trouble, and in part because big men just can't stay on the floor as long as guards typically. That's pretty extreme for anybody, but certainly for Woodson. And my point here is, you talk about, could Indiana have found this earlier in the season? And listen, none of this means anything to the wider scope of whatever comes next. If Indiana, for example, kind of trips and falls against Penn State midweek. But I just think it's interesting that it did feel at least a little bit to me today like there was sort of an abandonment of forget about preseason expectations, forget about what's come before, what's been disappointing today. Like, and Woodson said many times that he said, I just leaned on seniors, he said that over and over again, even to a certain extent, even Miles Rice is a senior. I mean, he's in his 4th year of college basketball. So it just kind of felt a little bit like Indiana, whether it was what was working today, whether it was some conscious choices made during the bye week because they did not play between the Friday loss to UCLA and the Sunday game today, whatever it might have been, it just felt like there was almost a conscious decision made to say, forget whatever's come before. We are just going to go with what works. And today, what worked was experience, leadership, guard play at both ends of the floor. Miles Rice and Anthony Leal, I thought, were outstanding defending Braden Smith. And then at the offensive end, Rice and Trey Galloway just kind of had control of the game for long stretches as point guards. It just felt a little bit like maybe Indiana just sort of saying, like, letting go of what's already happened and just trying anyway to just sort of determine their own fate from here on out.
Yeah, and I don't know if the answer is like it would have done something different in season. Like, would kind of the first 3 months and kind of what came after changed? Woodson, like, would he have built the roster differently if after all of this? And you bench Mackenzie Mbako, you don't play Carlisle really at all. I mean, hasn't played much at all the last 5 games. I mean, it's just sort of a fascinating. It's just a very strange team. The idea that they're so talented and can be capable of beating anybody on any night, but it's just ultimately, as a whole, the season's just been unquestionably disappointing. Yeah, and unlike you, I don't think what to expect even against Penn State. Like, would you be confident that they come back? Miles Rice, as good as he was defensively tonight, that's the first time kind of in the last month where he's put a stamp on his game on either side of the court. And so I don't know. It's just I could see how fans obviously excited to beat a rival, but I mean ultimately would feel just sort of bummed out by this as a sort of a larger just a missed opportunity for the season, because this is what it was supposed to look like throughout the whole thing, right? Or what fans I think.
Well, at least obviously I don't think it was supposed to look like.
Not the second half, but I mean
that's kind of
a double-digit win over some of the better team where you're competing like that.
Yeah, right? and that listen, I think that's why I find it interesting, and it may not. I mean, again, we'll only know what this win means in the context of whatever comes next. That is always true, and so we're sitting here talking about this in the immediate aftermath of an impressive victory that goes right back on Indiana's NCAA tournament resume, which, by the way, is, I think, better than people think it is, primarily because it's not a great bubble. It's never a great bubble. And Indiana does not have bad losses. They have maybe some ugly losses, but they don't have, from a net perspective or a KenPom perspective, terrible losses. I just find it interesting in the sense that maybe this isn't the case, but it felt a little bit today like any weight Indiana felt from all of what you're talking about, from the what if and the isn't this disappointing or whatever, was just kind of let go of somewhere, whether it was during the bye week, whether it was during halftime. Because listen, I mean, Indiana played, like, I thought, really well for 10 minutes and then very poorly for 10 minutes, which can also happen. Purdue's a good team. They're ranked. Again, until this recent skid, they were in the right at the top of the Big Ten. They're going to make the tournament comfortably. There's some really, really good players on that team. You're allowed to play badly against a good team for a little while. But to come out in the second half, I mean, they had they scored 7 points in like a minute and 15 seconds or something. And Painter called one of those timeouts. And from that moment forward, they just did not let up. There was just no, I mean, it wasn't, I think you said this too, it wasn't like they suddenly just started making a lot of low percentage shots. Like, it wasn't that they didn't hit 10 threes in the second half.
Right.
It was methodical. And it just kind of looked like a team that, to whatever extent it needed to, just let go of what any kind of concern it had or disappointment it had or whatever. There was also a lot of talk about, family after the game, and we're all just kind of fighting for each other through the end. It just felt a little bit like a team that, maybe kind of, I don't know if they found a sense of urgency or what, but just it looked different. Even, I would argue, than it's looked at times when Indiana's played well this season.
Yeah.
In terms of just, you felt like you were watching a team that was more convincing. And there were some moments in the second half where you thought, well, maybe maybe Indiana lets Purdue creep back into it a little bit, a la Maryland, or, the way that Indiana kind of couldn't quite get over the summit against Michigan or UCLA. None of that happened. And I mean, that, this is up there with the best games Indiana's probably played under Mike Woodson. Let's be honest.
I mean,
and it's a rivalry game. So again, maybe the trick now is repeating it, but
it doesn't matter. I mean, maybe that's a good transition point. I mean, you mentioned the tournament a little bit. Obviously 4 games to play in the regular season, a Big Ten tournament. I know, probably, I think, a lock, essentially. At least getting into the field.
I mean, if you look at it, like, briefly, Indiana's 7-9. There are 7 teams behind them.
They'd have to lose out and still get help.
Yeah,
essentially. But we talked about this a little bit on the podcast during the week. You said this was sort of the high noon. So what comes afternoon? Is it 1:00 on Penn State? Like, what's
no.
Like
8:30 p.m. and it's already 8:36, and there's a slide because there's a 6:30 BTN game. So
terrible.
Unfortunately, it's not 1 p.m.
What do they need to do sort of over this next 4 games? I think you said 3-2 plus a win in the Big Ten, but now with Purdue win as being one of them.
I think it's 4-1.
It's 4-1 still.
I think they need to win 3 out of their last 4.
And a game in the Big Ten tournament, or the Big Ten tournament becomes optional completely.
Here's what I would say. I think,
and the losses to Oregon.
What
you're saying?
Well, our good friend, I think, that's already baked in. I'm sure James is watching. But what I said, I think, on the podcast was basically, I think 4-1 if Purdue is one of the wins, I think gets them in.
Okay.
Because of the quality, the guaranteed. Like right now, for example, Ohio
State. So then the
State,
Big Ten tournament is irrelevant.
Yeah, the difficulty with the Big Ten tournament is what we've talked about, which is the committee just can't change that much.
Even if it's an ugly loss to Northwestern or something.
I think that's what you want to avoid, certainly.
Barring some sort of like ugly collapse.
Yeah. What you'd want, I think, is to go to the Big Ten tournament just looking for a little bit more validation. And then that maybe becomes the thing that seals the floor underneath you, not being in Dayton or something like that. But I think that I mean, if you just want to talk about it in terms of metrics, the Penn State win on the road is creeping a little bit safer. I think Penn State's 70 in the net right now. But the problem is, if you're Indiana, you need to beat them here. And if you can beat them well to make that win look better, but then does that make
helps you, but hurts you at the same
right.
time.
Ohio State right now is just outside the top 30, so that's not a quad one opportunity at this point. And again, they've been hovering right around that 30 line for a while, so I don't totally understand, but that's a separate conversation. So again, that's another one where does beating Ohio State lose you a quad one win opportunity?
You get the win, but it's not a quad one.
Right,
so
exactly.
You make
But that's why I thought Purdue was so important, was because the other part of it is Purdue at home, as good as Purdue is, always just felt like a more realistic game for Indiana to win than Oregon on the road, late game at the end of a 5-day road trip.
Sure.
Because college players just don't. That's an NBA thing, sure. College players don't do that.
So they lose 2. Can they play themselves in then through the tournament?
Maybe. I think then you're more at the
mercy of kind of what happens.
What else happens? And again, remember, somebody said they're 4-1 in quad one games, but they haven't lost a game in quad two. They haven't lost a game in quads 3 or 4, and the teams that you're going to be running up against will have for the most part. I know it's every bubble team fan base does this, and I understand why, because what's right in front of you is a lot more.
So what are the 4? It's Purdue, Michigan State, Penn State at neutral.
Ohio
State on the road.
The committee has tended to treat the Palestra as a road game.
So, but those are the 4, right?
Yes, those are the 4: Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, and now Purdue. And then the quad twos at this point would be, I think one might be Providence on a neutral floor, and the other one I would think would be one of the
USC or Rutgers.
Yeah, one of the early January home wins. So I mean, listen, again, all this is contextualized by what happens next. If Indiana comes out on Wednesday night and lays an egg against Penn State, which has now won 2 in a row, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, then that is a it doesn't undo like all of the good work that was done today, but it just sort of feels like, okay, but this team, a tiger can't change its stripes kind of thing. I just think this is kind of, I said this in the podcast, I thought Indiana needed to win this game to open the door to one last genuine push for the postseason, and they did. And you know what? To their credit too, they won it well. That matters. We've talked about this before. Margin of victory, efficiency, that stuff helps. And for Indiana to win it the way Indiana won it is pretty important too.
Yeah, I mean, but so does the 4-1 then just put them on the bubble, as in terms of like, are they still gonna have to sweat it out? Like, I mean,
I think they'd be close. Again, that's where maybe you could do yourself a favor by going and picking up like another quad 2 or a quad 1 in Indy. Could you? Because I mean, like, the other thing to remember is if they do win 3 of these last 4, then they're going to be 10-10 in the Big Ten, and at that point, they're probably in a situation where they wind up playing somebody on the Thursday that can help them a little bit. From like for example, let's say they played in Northwestern. Well, right now Northwestern's 54 in Ken Pom. On a neutral floor, that's not a bad win.
Yeah.
Even if Northwestern
that Northwestern has been their nemesis, though. So
well, but you used them as the example. If you played
tricky team,
if you played USC on a neutral floor, 58 in Ken Pom, that's not a bad win. And then obviously we can go all the way up the ladder and find teams that Indiana could beat that would be genuinely good wins. But I think, and I'll also admit, I have not until recently paid really close attention to the bubble because it just hadn't felt, until Indiana.
But the last time you sounded this this time we left the door open. We're like, maybe this team will make the run. Was that after that 5-game win streak? When we're like, maybe they figured it out.
Yeah.
And so like we know.
There was no real reason to kind of tune back into it until they won 2 of these last 3, because those are 2 guaranteed, not just quad 1, but I think the committee calls them quad 1A wins.
Yeah.
One of them is on the road, which helps tremendously. And so now you're in a situation where, I suspect if they win 3 of these last 4, they are in the tournament. Like if you $50, put it down, and no penalty for losing. I suspect if they win 3 of these last 4 in basically any arrangement, they make the tournament. It might be a question of maybe a win in Indy gets you out of Dayton, or maybe a win in Indy just sort of seals it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the thing is, again, the worst thing that could happen to you here probably is either a Penn State loss at home, which quad 2, or a Washington loss, which is quad 2. But in this scenario, you also pick up another quality road win, another quad 1 road win at Oregon. So, and like even if all you finish is just with 2 quad 2s and a quad 3, and you lose the Oregon game, that still helps. I mean, that's still, again, the argument for Indiana in this scenario is going to be that a bunch of other bubble teams either A, haven't beaten anybody because they're coming from a mid-major league. Let's like a Drake, for example, where maybe they don't win they win the Valley, but they don't win the tournament. Or B, somebody, I'd have to go through and look at some resumes because, again, I haven't clocked in totally on the tournament, and I guess I will now. Somebody from an ACC or a Big 12 who might have a similar number of wins, might even have a couple, 1 or 2 more quad 1 wins. But the problem is they also got some quad 3 or quad 4 losses. Whereas Indiana's argument is basically going to be, we don't have a ton of great wins, but we've lost to no one bad, and we have multiple quality wins in a good conference, including multiple quality wins on the road.
You're making the pitch.
They
should be in the room.
They got to make the pitch. I mean, they got to win the games. But
yeah, I mean, there's still road left, right? Obviously, things can change. I mean, we've seen
2 big weeks.
We've seen crazier things happen this season. This is a team that's to the bitter end. Is going to be hard to predict sort of what effort they give, what performance. It's just a team that is hard to read. Well, I mean, that's been kind of their motto, or what was that? Their identity, I guess.
Yeah, because I mean, even there have been times like after that Michigan State game where you sort of felt like, well, maybe now they're just sort of free of the burden of all the speculation and everything, and they just go play. But then then they can't. Like if they'd beaten UCLA, like we wouldn't be talking about bubble. They'd be in, and it'd just be a question of, can they finish strong enough to not put themselves back in danger. But then you'd also be telling the story of the team that had won 3 in a row against Michigan State, UCLA, and Purdue, one of them on the road. It has just been that inconsistency. And again, that's why I'm just sort of curious about, it almost felt a little bit like Indiana just sort of made some sort of conscious effort to throw off the weight of, oh, this season won't be what we thought it would be. And just sort of like, at least today, and sometimes this is just a function of a rivalry game.
Yeah.
But at least today, just sort of said, we're going to play the game in front of us. And once they turned it on with this building, that's as good of an atmosphere as this building's had probably in 2 years. Kansas game last year, the only one. Yeah. With this building behind it, I mean, they were impressive today.
We got some viewers. Anybody got any comments or questions that want to join in before we head out and start writing about this game? Got 44 people if they want to chime in.
Well, a few people chimed in. Alex Graham talks, of course, about Liverpool's famous win today.
The famous win? Was that big of a? It was that big of a deal. Huh?
I don't know if you know, but they're 11 points clear.
11 points
with
clear.
11 games left to play.
So they'd have to.
I would
really pour down the stretch.
Yeah.
That's huge.
We're feeling good.
We're good.
We're feeling good. I think we'll leave it there for now.
Wait. There we go.
Oh. Somebody asked, what do you explain why you left Renew out in the second half for so long? Well, number one, I thought Ballo played better in the second half. Number two, Renew had foul trouble.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, Renew he only played 24 minutes. Again, a lot of that was fouls. When he was on the floor, I mean, I thought that was as good as he looked when he was on the floor.
He played 16 minutes in the first half, 8, because he picked up kind of like he does that, just picks up.
Well, he picked up the third one, and they took him out, and then they brought him back in, and he picked up the fourth one not too long after that. So, I mean, it was – and again, the other part of it, too, is what were Ballo's second half numbers? Ballo had some really good moments in the second half.
He had 8 points and 4 rebounds.
Yeah, 8 points, 4 rebounds. He had that loud alley-oop slam that felt kind of like the dagger. If it wasn't that, it was the Trey Galloway 3. But, yeah, I mean, I just – and again, the other part of it, too, is I think Indiana got to a place with its big rotation where it was playing from a position of strength because Purdue was managing fouls, was trying to just sort of steal minutes when Kaufman-Wren wasn't on the floor, which has been a problem for them for a while. Caleb First just has not been sort of an adequate enough backup defensively, consistently enough. We saw that in West Lafayette. That was part of the reason that game was so close. And so I think there was also a little bit of an element of, well, we're going to keep sort of playing from a position of strength and riding the hot hand because in the post, Purdue was chasing Indiana today.
Yeah, and as good as Renew was, those baskets were set up by the guard play. A lot of
Yes.
his
I thought he was. I
And they
thought he
were
was a
running
lot better defensively.
and they were running the plays with the same plays they could do with Balo, with
Yeah.
pick and rolls and stuff. So.
Kaufman ran 9 points on 11 shots, fouls out, and 3 turnovers. I thought Renew, that was as good as he's looked for me defensively.
Only 1
a
point in
while.
the second half.
Yeah.
12-4.
Yeah, and he played 12 minutes too. It wasn't just because of foul trouble. Like he was
Excuse me.
he was on the floor. But I thought that Renew and Balo both did a great job against him. So, any other business?
I'm good. Nobody else has anything? Other questions or comments?
11 points clear.
Yeah. But you're not wearing your Liverpool stuff underwear? I thought you probably is that Liverpool?
Yeah.
So is it a duck? What is it?
It's a bird.
What is the bird?
It's the liver bird.
It's the what bird?
It's the liver bird. It's the
Liver bird?
Liver bird.
Liver
City
bird.
the symbol of the city of Liverpool.
City. Anthony Leo played with boys. We'll get another comment.
That's true. He did play with boys today. Early level 500 prediction from you.
Who's my prediction?
I don't know. I haven't. I mean, track.
You're my level 5 guy. You're my
The
insider.
track was supposed to open this week, and it couldn't because it was 10 degrees outside.
Is that when practice starts? We're already.
Yeah,
We're getting in
it
the
always
swing of it?
opens like basically pretty reliably the Monday after whatever week Valentine's Day's in. Pretty reliably.
Monday after Valentine's. So then, but when you get on the track, you can give us some inside scoop about who's.
No, I'm going to keep all my thoughts to myself because I got some strategizing to do.
A duck. Is he laughing at me? It
I
looks
think
like a duck.
it doesn't look like a duck.
Looks like a duck.
It does not look like a duck.
I don't get it.
Hmm.
So is that for the team or just that you're supporting the city?
Well, this is an independent clothing manufacturer called Love Follow Conquer.
Right, but are they?
Shout out Ian
Is it
Maloney.
just supporting the city or is it like supporting the team?
Well, I don't think.
Team. A team.
Yeah, I
shirt?
think this would be considered like Liverpool specific, like
Okay.
the club.
Like Liverpool, the club.
But you have to understand, like the club and the city are very synonymous,
Intertwined.
Yes, culturally
So
speaking.
they're holding up these baby ducks in support of Liverpool. I'm not a soccer guy. I'm sorry.
We can tell.
Yeah.
We can certainly tell. Indiana 73, Purdue 58. Hoosiers are 16-11. They're 7-9 in the Big Ten, and they are home Wednesday night against Penn State. Between now and then, for the Indianapolis Star, I'm Zach Osterman for the Herald Times. He's
Sure.
Mike the Duck Niziolek.
Baby
Thank
ducks.
you so much for watching and listening. We'll talk to you soon.